points of how you can interact with your microphone. Make sure it's on and off when you're not speaking. Earpiece, if it's not in your ear, make sure it's on the little dial here. And thank you again to our interpreters. We are just, we're going to have an opportunity to hear some more testimony on this important study. The Indigenous Police Chiefs of Ontario are here. We have James Killeen, Vice President, Chief of Police, United Chief and Council of Manitoulin, Anishinaabe Police Services. Welcome. Kai Liu, Executive Director, Chief of Police Retired, Treaty 3, Police Service. Jeff Sky, Chief of Police, Anishinaabe Police Service. Welcome to the three of you. You will have 5 minutes to present. We also have Karen Bell, Chief of Garden River First Nation and a police officer as well, who is just trying to get online. We've been experiencing some IT issues here on the Hill, so we will be monitoring that, and we may have to suspend to allow her to participate. We also have Six Nations Police Service, Darren Montour, Chief of Police by video conference. All three of you will have 5 minutes, so we'll start, hear your testimony, and if we need to suspend for a brief minute to allow Karen to get online, we will. So I will start first with Indigenous Police Chiefs of Ontario. Please, Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My name is Jeff Sky. I am the Chief of Police of the Anishinaabe Police Service, situated out of Garden River First Nation, and I am starting my 34th year in First Nation policing. We are here representing the Indigenous Police Chiefs of Ontario, also known as IPCO. IPCO was founded in 2019 and represents the 9 self-administered First Nation police services that operate in the province of Ontario. In total, IPCO member police services serve 85 First Nations in Ontario. We advocate together for equitable policing for all First Nations in Ontario. We also advocate for serious and significant changes to First Nation police, and some recent successes include working with our funding partner Ontario to provide a provincial pension plan equal to the OPP for our members. Also, we were part of the Community Safety and Policing Act 2019, which was co-developed with First Nations and allows First Nations to opt in to legislated standards for community safety. The struggles of First Nation policing. This committee 4 years ago heard about the struggles of First Nation policing, how we were asked to do more with less in extremely challenging conditions. The committee also heard about the extensive failures of Canada's First Nation and Inuit Policing Program, or the FNIPP. In particular, the committee heard about how the FNIPP, which launched in 1991, was built on a promise, and that was to promise equitable policing for First Nations comparable to non-First Nation communities. The committee also heard how the promise was never fulfilled. Since the FNIPP launched, the promise has never been forgotten. The underlying policy was quite literally disappeared. We call it the phantom policy. And instead, Canada imposes unfair, discriminatory rules through the terms and conditions, which fails First Nation people. As my colleague Kai Liu will explain in a moment, multiple courts have ruled that these terms and conditions are arbitrary and discriminatory and force First Nations to endure restrictive rules which would never apply to non-Indigenous people. While First Nations policing has changed somewhat, there is still significant work to be done. As some examples of the work, some detachments don't even have lockers or change room facilities. Recently, one of the detachments, through funding, holding cells were built that was made of drywall. The drugs violence is our biggest challenge affecting First Nations on drugs and associated violence. While the drug crisis affects everyone, First Nation communities are particularly hard hit with an influx of drugs and gangs from Southern Ontario. People, especially our young, are dying, and we don't have the resources to do anything about it. These incidents are anomalies. They are increasing the norm for First Nation communities. Gangs target First Nation communities because they know there's nobody to stop them. First Nation Police Service has been chronically underfunded, affecting our ability to provide 24/7 policing and keep communities safe. We simply do not have the resources, the funding, the officers, the equipment to tackle this crisis, and is killing our peoples, especially the young. And we are asking you, the committee, to help us encourage Public Safety Canada to help make that happen. I just want to say, Miigwech, and thank you for my few minutes, as I'm trying to speed up as quick as I can, and like to hand over to my colleague, Kai Liu.
Good afternoon. My name is Kai Liu, Executive Director of the Indigenous Police Chiefs of Ontario and former Chief of the Treaty 3 Police Service. I want to highlight two key developments: major court rulings confirming discrimination in Canada's First Nations and Inuit policing program, and IPCO's own successful legal action. In Quebec, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal and the Federal Court of Appeal found that Canada discriminates through FNIPP by refusing to negotiate honorably and imposing arbitrary terms and conditions. In 2024, the Supreme Court went further, ruling that Canada breached the honour of the Crown, in describing negotiations with Public Safety Canada as like having a knife to the throat. IPCO intervened in that case to share Ontario's experience. In 2023, IPCO launched its own human rights complaint and won emergency federal court relief after 3 of our police services had their funding cut off. The federal court ordered Canada to maintain funding, suspend discriminatory terms, and negotiate in good faith. Yet Canada continues to delay our broader complaint. We believe these issues can and should be resolved through honorable, good faith engagements without further litigation.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
Go ahead.
My name is James Kalina. I'm the Chief of Police of UCCM Anishinaabe Police Service out in the Menindu-Munising area of Manitoulin Island. I'm also the Vice President of the Indigenous Police Chiefs of Ontario, and I'm a proud Mohawk from Akwesasne. The definition of essential is absolutely necessary, and the definition of an essential service is daily services to preserving life, health, public safety, and societal functioning. Ask yourselves as you hear those definitions, what part of First Nation policing or the communities that we represent do those definitions not entail? The answer is all. We take care of all of those issues. I want to speak briefly about what we hope this committee takes away from today. First, the problems with the First Nation Inuit policing program are not new. In 2014, the Auditor General found that the program was not accessible, not transparent, failed to meaningfully include First Nations in negotiations, and urgently needed its terms and conditions updated. A decade later, the 2024 Auditor General report found the situation had worsened. Public Safety Canada still had no equitable funding approach, and it continues to fall short in program management, and it still has not meaningfully consulted First Nations. As well, adding to it is the word program. We are not an experiment. The word program insinuates that we are here part-time. It's been over 3 decades. It is no longer a program. It's not called Federal Policing Program, Provincial Policing Program, or Municipal Policing Program. We should not be a program any longer. We are here to stay. Second, despite repeated court rulings directing Canada to fix this, the federal government continues acting as if the decisions do not exist. IPCO's own human rights complaint, which you heard about earlier, have been stalled in procedure, and Canada has twice changed the terms and conditions after an injunction, again, without any consultation. We ask this committee to take what you've heard today and ask Public Safety Canada directly what is being done to fix this program. Third, we are concerned because we've now been told that Canada intends to change the terms yet again. And the reason this is so important, because this is happening in January 2026. These new rules would block us from obtaining legal advice to challenge any discriminatory terms and would stop us from carrying over unspent funds. These changes are not just arbitrary, they are discriminatory, and they further limit our ability to serve our communities. They are also 2 of the reasons that kept all 3 of our services alive when their funding was cut off in January of 2023. The ability to have that carryover was the ability for us to sustain our police services. Fourth, this program has existed for over 30 years. The courts have ordered an overhaul. First Nations have asked for one for decades. We should not have to win another ruling just to be heard. Canada regularly claims the process is complex, that funding is unavailable, yet in 2023, the minister updated the terms and conditions with the stroke of a pen to finally allow funding for basic policing units such as crime units, drug units, and canine units, which are very sorely needed in our communities. So we know change is possible when Canada chooses it. Meanwhile, in Ontario, the Community Safety and Policing Act now allows First Nations to opt into a framework with mandatory, adequate, and culturally responsive policing. That is not true federally. What does that say about Canada and the views of First Nation police services?
James, I'm just going to get you to wrap up, and then you'll be able to provide more during the testimony for the rest of it, please.
Okay. Finally, I just want to close with a question. In 2023, I attended the federal, provincial, territorial ministers meeting, and at that time we asked, do First Nations matter? Based on the last 2 years of delays, silence, and avoidance, the answer appears to be no. We are asking again here today as representatives of IPCO and our proud First Nation communities, do we matter? And we hope that we do.
Thank you very much. Darren, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Firstly, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to speak on this very important issue. My name is Darren Montour. I am the Chief of Police for the Six Nations Police Service. I was born and raised here on the Six Nations of the Grand River. I am a proud Mohawk and a member of the Wolf Clan. I have spent my entire 33 and a half years policing my home community. I am the president of the Indigenous Police Chiefs of Ontario and also vice president of the Central Region for the First Nations Chiefs Police of Ontario Association. What I'm going to discuss here are the same issues that my predecessors in First Nations leadership have been stating since the inception of the First Nations and Inuit policing program in 1991. Policing in First Nations communities has long been shaped by structural inequalities, chronic underfunding, and governance models that differ dramatically from those of non-Indigenous jurisdictions. These disparities are especially evident in the FNIPP program and the primary mechanism through which community police services are funded and delivered to First Nations communities. Despite the essential role police services play in community safety and well-being, First Nations policing in Canada is not legally recognized as the essential service, both which reflects and perpetuates unequal treatment. The 2024 Auditor General Report sharply criticized the FNIPP for its systemic failures, including practices that amount to systemic racism in the way services are structured, funded, and monitored. Money was left unspent in that Auditor General Report. With essential service legislation, this will ensure longevity, sustainability, and equality for First Nations policing across the country. This has been in discussion since 2021 and seems to have fallen off of the priority list. Negotiation of new funding agreements are taxing and take up valuable time and resources that could be used policing rather than fighting for adequate funding. There is no such thing as meaningful negotiations as listed in our tripartite agreements. Timeliness of agreement expiry is left for no negotiation availability. There's not enough time to negotiate a new contract when you're told to sign at the end of January or you don't get funding at the start of April of the next fiscal year. Being able to have resources and manpower reflective of the population of the communities that we police are essential to do the job to the best of our abilities, like those in non-Indigenous communities. Recruitment is also a constant hurdle in First Nations policing. The IPCO human rights complaint, as Edie Liu spoke of earlier, is basically chastises the First Nations Inuit policing program. And we also had to take Ontario to court for another human rights complaint for pension equity. So with these disparities in manpower, equipment, resources, this leads to mental impacts of our own people. The effects of intergenerational trauma from residential schools is still prevalent in Indigenous communities. The IPCO Mental Health Review recommended 27 recommendations to help improve the mental health of the officers, civilian, and the families. Lack of resources, equipment, infrastructure, manpower, and mental health anguish of members leads to PTSD and burnout and eventually resignations of members, which in turn jeopardizes community safety. Community policing is important for our communities. I always say that the epitome of community policing is First Nations policing. We are from these communities. We know the culture, we know the language, you know the dynamics, we know the people. We're related to everybody in the community. And lastly, with the lack of resources, manpower, this can lead to an influx of organized crime into Indigenous communities. Speaking specifically at Six Nations here, with the influx of organized crime into the tobacco and the cannabis issues here in this community lead to turf wars. We have had gang violence, we have had shootings, we have had arsons. And luckily with our partners in the Ontario Provincial Police, we've been able to start tackling this problem. But this problem continues and will continue until there's changes the way First Nations communities and First Nations police services are funded. Thank you for your time. Nyawa.
Thank you very much to everyone. And so we're going to go to our first round, which is 6 minutes of question and answer. And first off, for the Conservatives, I have Eric.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to confirm, is Chief Bell not able to join?
Not yet. She hasn't been able to come on. If she does come on in a reasonable amount of time, we'll suspend.
Okay. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here. And most importantly, thank you for your service and your commitment to keeping communities across our country safe. I'm happy to see a good contingent from Northern Ontario. And Mr. Liu, I know we've worked together a lot before, and I appreciate all of your work, particularly with Treaty 3. We also had the current police chief, Gervais, here earlier to speak to the committee, and it was concerning and frustrating for me to hear a lot of what she was bringing forward, because it was things that we have been talking about for many years. And she spoke of the gaps in service, the difficulty being able to recruit, the mental toll that it takes on those that are serving. She mentioned that no other police service in Canada is asked to compromise so consistently on safety, wellness, and sustainability as First Nation police services. And I think the frustration I have is that we're here, we're studying this again. It's an important issue. I'm happy we're studying it, but I'm frustrated that nothing has moved. And I want to know if you can just speak a little more to what the real-world consequences are for that safety, for safety in First Nation communities with the lack of action that we've seen.
I could summarize very quickly. Lives depend on change. Lives are affected each and every day that delays occur for meaningful change to the First Nation Inuit policing program.
I appreciate that. We also had some comments, I think, from a couple of you, maybe all of you, really, about the specialized units, and I'm happy that there's been some steps forward. Being allowed to have specialized units is obviously an important step in having that discriminatory practice removed. But the resources are a whole other thing. It's one thing to have those conditions removed, but I know that so many units are struggling with resources, particularly when it comes to human trafficking, drugs. That's the drug issue is something that is really impacting communities in Northern Ontario. So I don't know if Mr. Sky or Mr. Killeen, if you can speak to that lack of resources for those units.
Yeah, I'll gladly speak. So my background is, that's all I did in my previous police service was organized crime files, wiretaps, major investigations. And so I know what it takes to run those units, and we don't have what it takes. Even with the removal of that, you got to remember our police services are now 30 years behind. It takes an incredible amount of training. The smaller the community, the bigger the unit you need. And so for something such as a drug unit, there's been evidence to show that you need a minimum of 5 people, for instance, to do surveillance. So right now, with the funding that we're looking at, they're possibly saying, you're going to get a unit with 3 people in it. So it's already underfunded at the start of it. And the smaller the community, the more you would need. And the reason I say that, if I were to do surveillance in Toronto right now, I can blend in a lot easier. But to go into a First Nation community, to be there, I'm telling you, you would be instantly identified. People would be walking up to your car, knocking on your window, what are you doing here, who are you with, and wondering why you're there. So you need bigger units to be able to concentrate a lot better. We need massive amounts of training to get people up to those standards. When I joined a drug unit, I had heavy mentoring from people that were already in there. We don't have any of that. So I'm the mentor. I'm the chief of police, and I'm mentoring people because of my past experience, which is still valid. And I'll tell you, as a chief of police, I've been out on surveillance as early as this year on a major project. That was a joint force operation that was running between Toronto, Sudbury, and came onto the island. We have major gangs that are going on. And I don't want to just say the word gangs. I'm going to read some of these names to you. Actually, just from the top of my head, we have like the Chester Lee Gang, the Driftwood Crips, 5-Star Generals. So these aren't, we just think these people are here. These are confirmed members that we work with through Toronto Guns and Gangs, as well as OPP organized crime units, that are able to identify these people. These are people that are in our communities. We have motorcycle gangs, the Hells Angels, the Outlaws, and the newly reformed Satan's Choice. And we already have full patch members of the Satan's Choice. The reason that's such a concern, for those that are not aware, I'm from Sudbury. That's where I originally was a police officer. Sudbury is the only police station in Canada to have been bombed by an organized crime group, and that was the Satan's Choice Motorcycle Club back in December of 1996. Now that group is reformed, and it is the same original, the founder of that group, it is now his son running it. So we look at the problems that are coming. This is already in my community, just not even a month ago that we had that. So these are major issues that we have going on. These are not, we think there's gangs here. These are gangs that are in our area and causing massive amounts of issues going on. And we do not have the training to be able to bring us up to speed.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I didn't want to cut you off, but I'm short for time. You also mentioned some more discriminatory changes being brought forward in January of 2026. I know you were pressed for time in your opening remarks.
Yes.
Could you please expand on what those changes are and how it's going to impact you?
Sure. So in March of 2023, when we filed our human rights complaint, our negotiations had just really actually just started, and they instantly stopped as soon as we filed that human rights complaint, and our funding was cut off. And the reason that that's so significant is that doesn't happen to federal, provincial, or municipal police. That's like, I worked for municipal police service. You were never afraid that if the chief of police and the mayor and council for the city were looking at a deal, that if it didn't work, they would cut off the funding. But that happened to us. What kept us alive was those carryover monetary funds and the ability for us to hire a lawyer to represent us. We're not lawyers. We're police officers, and there's a lot of logistics that go into legal arguments that we don't have the expertise on. It doesn't make sense that on one side they're able to have 14 lawyers look at an agreement, and on the First Nations side for the police service they don't. So those two conditions are specifically looking at to change. I look at it as that is actually, they looked at the two conditions that we used to keep us alive, and now they're going to change those conditions.
Well, thank you very much for that. And continuing on with the testimony, we'll have Jaime for the next 6 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your service, officers, and coming here to testify today. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit. You mentioned both Officer Montour and Officer Sky and Killeen talked about the influx of organized crime and gang-related activity because of lack of resources to your communities. Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of collaboration do you have with the OPP, with the RCMP for these major crimes where you need additional resources that are probably not available to most Indigenous police programs in Canada?
I can answer that. One of the things that is, we actually do have a very good relationship with all policing partners in the province of Ontario, including the RCMP. The problem we have, though, these are our communities, and we must be funded properly to have our own specialty units, and that's where the gap is. Now, when we do need the OPP to come into our communities, we actually have to send a letter of request to the Ontario Provincial Police Commissioner to get their specialized units to come into our communities. However, sometimes that doesn't always work. As an example, we don't have canines. Some do, but most of us don't. We don't have drug units, et cetera, et cetera. Just the list goes on, where we need to be get some sustainable funding to continue to hire that. And right now, even if we do get some funding, there's a ripple effect. So if you do start a specialty unit, you're taking frontline officers off the road to be promoted into those units, and then it leaves a gap at the front line. That's the problem we've been running into for over 3 decades. And I know myself, in my career, I was with the Anishinaabe Police Service, and then I joined the Treaty 3 Police Service. That was my treaty area, and then came back as the Chief of Police for Anishinaabe Police Service. So the unique challenges are no different across the province. They're all the same. And we do, without the commitment of all of those hardworking men and women on the front line, things would be drastically worse. But they're, without getting into the 2019 mental health report, there is consequences for that.
Just before I go to Chief Officer Montour, do you think that you have enough Indigenous police in your current area being trained, or do you think that we need an influx of many more, and how can we do that?
Well, we are starting to negotiate more officers for our police services. We have actually submitted to our funders for those officers through a service delivery model, similar to what the OPP have been doing for their police service. And they are now complete, and we are having them submitted, and we're just waiting for an answer if we're actually going to get that increase of officers.
And where do your officers get trained at?
The Ontario Police College.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. So when we do hiring our recruitment, we hire specific to our communities if we can. However, we will hire people that are not from the communities. And, the recruitment is always a struggle because most of our communities are fairly remote, not close by to major cities, but some are. And that's always a challenge to recruit. And who's going to join our service when you don't have sustainable funding? I call it part-time funding that comes to an end. Who's going to look at that as a long-term job when your funding runs out? Like right now at Anishinaabe Police Service, our funding runs out in March 31st of 2026 with no carryover.
And how long are usually the agreements that you sign with the federal government? Are they 5-year, 3-year, 10-year?
Well, in the past few years, the 3 police services, UCCM, APS, and Treaty 3, are going year to year. This is the first time we've signed a 2-year agreement, and with an expiry date. Again, that's not conducive to providing proper safety to our community members.
Would you say 5-year or 10-year models of transfers for sustainability would increase the amount of officers and help you deliver better services?
No, I disagree with that because we need funding that never ends. There's no cutoff date, and there should never be a cutoff date to policing in any community. That's what we're trying to say. And it was almost cut off. If it wasn't for the carryover, we would have had to shut down.
Okay. Officer Montour, do you want to build on that?
Yes, thank you for the question. And further to what my colleagues, Chief Killeen and Chief Sky, have said, organized crime is everywhere across this country. We all know that. There's the opioid crisis that's running rampant everywhere, especially in Indigenous communities. We also have the influx of gangs incoming from the GTA to Brantford, which is a nearby city just off the Six Nations territory here. We're seeing more and more handguns seized. There's more violence that's happening. And with the tobacco trade that's here, we have the organized crime groups putting pressure on residents here in the community. They'll partner with them, take over their land, give them some money to basically keep quiet. And with that comes competition with the other businesses here. And like I said in my opening statement, we had a very well-known establishment here in the community, the Burger Barn, and it came into a turf war situation where ultimately that business was burned down to the ground. Luckily, no one was hurt. And a few months later, or like a few weeks later, there was an arson attempt at the home of the owner of the Burger Barn. Luckily, with our partners in the OPP and working with them diligently, we were able to make an arrest in that situation. But again, that's all tied into organized crime in the GTA, ultimately back into the different cities in the Golden Horseshoe area, because where we're located, we're in the most populous area of the country. We're an hour from Buffalo, we're an hour from Toronto, we're half an hour from Hamilton. So we see the influx of organized crime, and luckily we partner with our OPP colleagues on a continuous basis, our municipal colleagues. My service, along with other services, belong to the Criminal Intelligence Service of Ontario, which helped us greatly.
Thank you, Chief. We're going to go to the next questioner, and there'll be more opportunities for you to provide input. So, Sébastien, for 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Miigwech, for your presence here today. Commander Sky, Commander Killeen. It's a pleasure to meet you over a few weeks, and you have really made me aware of several issues through your that are connected to your practice. Something that struck me is that the Indigenous Chiefs of Ontario affirmed that First Nations have to have freedom to conceive and to administer their own model of police, but the funding, provincial and federal structure, means that the Ontario Provincial Police still provides many services in terms of backup and everything. Should the funding program be adapted so that the First Nations Police Service can develop their own specialized expertise, for example, in reconstitution of accidents, homicide investigation, and also missing persons?
I think what we're trying to say here is the First Nation policing program needs to sunset and be replaced with federal legislation or Ontario under the Community Safety Policing Act. I think that's where we want to go, and I think we need to collaborate with public safety in Ontario and communicate and work out something for the longevity of policing on our First Nation communities.
Could I just add, when you talk about, when we don't have specialized units, such as traffic reconstruction, it delegitimizes your police service. And I'll give you an example. There was a very brutal, terrible accident right in front of one of our band offices. And the comments from our community are, why are UCCM police not investigating this? Why are the OPP coming in here to our area? And then it's, well, they're the real police. They're the fake police. They're just here as a show. And that is not true. We have very competent officers. We don't have the units to be able to do that. When we talk about drug units and when we're working with the OPP, so my first year here as the chief of police, we did a joint force operation, an undercover operation with the Ontario Provincial Police. It was very successful. But as soon as that's done, they have their own communities to take care of. We don't get to keep that drug unit. It moves on. And when you don't have a concentrated saturation on a certain area of a criminal element, such as drug trafficking or human trafficking, it just perpetuates and it comes back, and it comes back 3 or 4 times. With that undercover project we did, as soon as it ended, it created a vacuum and it started a turf war. So within 1 month, we had an attempt murder and a murder involving the same group that had originally been fighting with the people that we arrested in the undercover project. So you do need those units to continually work, and it also, those specialized units, that offers lateral movement for your officers and your civilian staff within the organization to keep growing and to learn and to grow as professionals and grow as a police service. And it legitimizes your entire police service. We should be able to, at some point, especially after 30 years plus, not have to ask our big brother for help all the time. Although we appreciate everything that we get from the OPP and the RCMP, it would be nice for us to do our own major cases. Currently at UCCM, we have a missing Indigenous woman, Juanita Migwans, and I want to say her name here because it's very sad that she's gone missing. And we should have carriage of that investigation, but we don't have the detectives to be able to handle a major case management. We don't have the numbers by legislation to be able to do that. And so the OPP have to take carriage of that investigation. But that should be an Indigenous service looking after a missing Indigenous woman.
À l'heure actuelle, en fait, on a porté à mon attention.
Presently, actually, it was mentioned to me that on the North Coast, that there's a crisis in the street of organized crime. Same thing in Témiscamingue, First Nation, and Notre-Dame-du-Nord. Do you think that there's an increase in crime in Indigenous communities that's related to organized crime that's being established in other communities? Have you seen that in Ontario? I think that the case in Timmins was mentioned to me. Could you talk to us about that more?
Northern communities have been completely inundated and infiltrated by organized crime. I have personally spoken to a gang member while the chief of police at UCCM, and I asked, why are you coming here? And he boldly told me to my face, I've been here for years, you didn't know about me. I will continue to come here. You do not have the resources to be able to concentrate on me. They know this, and he told that to me boldly to my face and said, I'll be back as soon as I get out of jail. So that is not something unique just to my communities. I worked in Sudbury. We saw the infiltration of gangs starting specifically in 2006 with a major incident that happened in our city at that time with a shooting that had taken place, and we really saw gangs starting to come. It is all over. I was part of the Criminal Intelligence Service of Ontario. I was the representative when I was a police officer in Sudbury, and we would have meetings and we would meet with all those officers. They would talk about all of the gang members, and we have the same people that I was working on in Sudbury are now on Manitoulin Island. Those are also the same gang members that are going up to Thunder Bay, Timmins, Sault Ste. Marie, and then all of our First Nation communities. It is a massive, major problem that has been ignored for too long.
Keith Miigwech.
Merci beaucoup. Next up for the Conservatives, they have the 5-minute round, and I believe I have Billy Morin here for. You're going to go to Larry? Larry, take it away.
Thank you, Chair, and excuse me, thank you to all the witnesses for your attendance. I too want to thank you for your levels of service. Between the four of you, we're talking probably well over 100 years of community policing and service, so thank you for that. I'm hearing a consistent theme from all of you about the rising influence of organized crime in your communities. It's not just native to Indigenous communities, it's every community across this country. We also have transnational organized crime coming from Mexico, coming from South America. I don't know if you're seeing that in your communities. But to your point, Chief Killeen, about the interaction you had with that one individual, they all know that you're completely under-resourced, which is an invitation to set up camp in your communities and terrorize communities. But I think the bigger, broader question is, in addition to a lack of resources, we have a lack of teeth in our criminal justice system. When it comes to bail, we have issues of bail. We have catch and release that the Liberals have not fixed for 10 straight years. We also have weak, ineffective sentencing guidelines for all the major offenses. It does not provide any deterrence, does not provide any denunciation, does not provide for any incentive for these individuals to choose a different path. So to you, Chief Montour, welcome. You're part of my community. What would you say with respect to that broader question? Is it an issue? And please opine on that and how it can be improved.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mr. Brock. Good to see you again. Yes, it is it's a challenging issue, especially in my community here at Six Nations. I know, Mr. Brock, from your former career as a Crown prosecutor in Brantford, you've seen that on a daily basis, because 99% of the time, what incidents we're dealing with here, the accused is Indigenous as well as the victim. And I look at the Gladue factors that come about upon sentencing and bail hearings. Don't get me wrong, Gladue does have a place in our legal system. But for those repeat serious dangerous offenders charged with various serious offenses, firearms offenses, domestic violence offenses, they are continually being released and having an ankle monitor put on them. And 2 or 3 weeks later, they're cutting it off and then they're into the wind. Prime example is the individual who removed his ankle monitor and later murdered and killed Constable Greg Pershella just in Hagersville, just outside of my community here. That was a very tragic time for the whole entire community because my officers were responding to that call as well. And one of those officers was my nephew. So I see that the bail reform needs to be drastically improved because continuously we hear the frustrations of those domestic violence victims, those victims of those serious assaults, saying, is this a justice system or is it just a legal system? Because to me,
you right there,
change.
Chief, if I could stop you right there. The Liberal response to the bail crisis has been to introduce Bill C-14, which does not remove entirely the principle of restraint. That principle that requires judges to release individuals at the earliest opportunity on the least restrictive conditions. Knowing that C-14 does not address that, what is your position as a police officer?
To me, with all due respect, that makes no sense because those people charged with those serious offenses, like Chief Colleen said, they know the system. They know they're going to get out. And with these factors taken into account, my thing is, even with the Gladue factors for sentencing and that, where does that outweigh the safety of the public?
Right.
I've continuously said that, especially with these violent offenders that keep coming back to the community. We're also getting violent offenders from other communities, non-Indigenous people living here in the territory. And then we're dealing with them, whether it's a drug execution warrant, they're armed with illegal firearms, handguns that are smuggled in from the U.S. And there has to be a change because I foresee that there's going to be another tragedy, I hate to say that, before something is done.
Thank you all
very much. And now we have Brendan for 5 minutes.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Am I on? Yes. Thank you, and I will set my timer as I go. Mr. Brock did so well, I didn't notice the time had passed so quickly, but I want to thank you also, all on screen included for your service and also for your really important testimony today. Chief Liu, I wanted to start with you because I noticed that you retired in 2023. Here you are, obviously still as as a member of the association, still heavily involved. We've heard a lot about the impact of organized crime, but I wonder, as you reflect over, decades of service, what would you describe as where we are today? In terms of the challenges that you've seen over the decades, in terms of community safety in general.
Thank you, and thank you for that question. I served before retiring and taking on the executive director position 37 years of policing, of which 33 years with the municipal police services. I started with the Ottawa Police Service, 22 years, and then became chief of police of the Gananoque Police Service, just outside of Kingston, Ontario, and as well 7 years with the Cobourg Police Service, an hour outside of Toronto. With that 33 years of policing, my understanding of community-based policing was totally changed when I was recruited and asked to go up to Treaty 3 Police as their chief of police. I immediately realized what I was experiencing or witnessing in First Nation policing is nothing that I had witnessed in municipal policing. if someone calls 911 sitting in where we are today in the city of Ottawa, within 4 minutes or less, a police officer, a gang of police officers, a group of police officers would arrive and respond to that emergency. In Treaty 3, if someone called, first of all, many of our communities don't have 911, so you would have to call an eight-digit number. But if you were able to get through and called and said that there was an active shooter or any other major crime, it could take up to 3 hours for the police to respond. By that time, a criminal would be able to not only bury the body, but to disappear. Where if it took more than 7 minutes, I would think that here in the city of Ottawa, there would be an inquest as to why the police took so long. The differences of municipal policing, provincial policing to First Nation is hard to describe, and I would leave as an invitation to the committee. I don't know what your plans are, but the invitation is this, that if there is an opportunity to travel into any of these self-administered First Nation police services, spend a night, spend a couple hours, and ride in a police car with that police officer, and you will see firsthand the significant differences of First Nation policing.
Thank you so much. And I know you could probably go on for hours, and that would be very valuable as well. But I want to take advantage of the remaining time. Chief Killeen, you referred to a tragically missing Indigenous woman, and you named her, and I appreciate that. Are you seeing changes since there are over 200 calls for justice from the Missing and Murdered Women's Indigenous report? There has been action in many of those areas. Are you seeing a difference on the ground since the publication of the report, since the recommendations have come out? What are you seeing in terms of actions or gaps in implementation of those calls for justice?
A major impact from that report, and with UCCM, we don't even have a human trafficking unit. So a lot of the women that end up missing from our communities are being human trafficked. And for those that are not aware of a human trafficking unit and the intricacies of those units, so when you're dealing with victims of human trafficking, you're dealing with the ultimate in a victim. They are sexually assaulted, financially assaulted, physically assaulted, every kind of assault you could think of, and it goes on for years. When those victims are unable to cooperate, and a lot of them are unable to cooperate, so and the reason is they are mentally and physically controlled by their perpetrators. I used to run a human trafficking unit. I was the head of it in Sudbury, and a successful human trafficking unit would be very shocking for people to understand, but Sudbury had one of the most successful units, and we had, I think, 5 convictions, right? So it doesn't sound like a lot, but to get someone to come on side and be able to testify. And we had people that would be on side, give their statement, and then show up in court, see their perpetrator, and turn and run. You can't get upset with that. It's absolutely terrifying. And so the victim of a one-time, one-moment sexual assault is horrific, but it's that one moment, and then they are able to hopefully move on from that. A victim of human trafficking, again, they are victimized over years, and we, in our place, we want a human trafficking unit that concentrates specifically on that, so that we are aware of a number of women that are going missing that we would want to be able to concentrate on and go and work with them and convince them to come back to their home communities and convince them to try and get out of that lifestyle and to give them what they need in order to survive outside of that violent relationship that they have existing with their trafficker. So we have not seen a huge increase in those recommendations at UCCM. I can't speak for the other police services, but I don't think they have specific and concentrated human trafficking units, and it would make a massive difference in our community.
Thank you very much for that. Now we have Sebastian for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I know that you're very interested in the issue of mental health. The mental health of officers is also related to broader issues in terms of recognition by police authorities. How does the recognition of First Nations police officers as an essential service would have, what would it have as results for officers in mental health?
When the First Nation policing program was started in the early 90s, there's been little investment in the policing program. And I call it a resource deficit over 30 years. And everything that we do affects everything regarding safety of our communities because the lack of, or I would call it purposely, not investing in our policing services, safety in our communities. We get what goes on with other services outside of First Nation policing. The amount of resources they're given, the funding that they're given. And we have been studied in almost every category you can think of. And we're the highest, almost everything. So when it comes to the effects of mental health in our communities, not only our communities, but also within the police officers, where they're working extraordinary hours right from the start of their careers with no end in sight, looking and hoping that someday there would be some adequate resources, investments. And one day I'm going to retire soon, but I would like this resource deficit to be fixed, not over another 30 years, hopefully in 5-10 years maybe. Some investments, but it's very discouraging. And the budget that was just passed doesn't mention First Nation policing at all. Maybe some mention of, it might be mentioned in the spring. So it's very difficult. We work with what we have. With our funding shortfalls, we do our best to provide benefits that addresses mental health. We do rely heavily on our culture, our medicines from our communities, because there's no cost. And to go to doctors, it's very difficult to find a doctor right now in a First Nation community. So the challenges are just always there, and we do the best we can to make it work. But we can't continue and sustain that forever.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Je veux souligner votre leadership sur cet enjeu-là.
I'd like to acknowledge your leadership on that issue through the report that you gave the committee. That's very interesting.
Now we have William for 5 minutes.
Thank you, gentlemen, for appearing before us. Quite often, when I get to go around in my areas, I get to say that I'm like one of the largest ridings in Alberta. This committee actually has several other guys that are much larger than me, so we're in a pretty good company here when we say we represent a large chunk of rural Canada. And so to Mr. Liu, Chief, if you could tell me a little bit. You started on going down the process of or talking about how much longer it takes for response times. Can you talk to us a little bit about how it shows a difference in the rural areas versus, like you said, for funding per capita or funding per police officer in regards to how a difference in the rural areas versus in more of the cities?
So in the Ontario Provincial Police, which also includes rural policing, their funding model is based on response time, the number of calls, distance, where in First Nation policing, the numbers that are attributed, the number of officers and civilian staff is an arbitrary number that has been given to First Nation police services. So there is no real study, with the exception of 3 police services that are currently Public Safety Canada is under a court injunction to negotiate funding with. So those 3 services are the Treaty 3 Police Service, UCCM, and the Anishinaabeg Police Service. those three services, because they had their funding cut off, had gone to federal court. And the federal court, Justice Gascon, ruled that they have to continue negotiating in good faith with those three services. But right across the country, the numbers are arbitrary. And when they're arbitrary, it is not like a municipal service. When I was chief of police of 2 municipal services, I could come back to the Police Services Board and say and justify why I needed budget increases, annual budget increases, and it would be negotiated or discussed with the board. But ultimately, there was legislation that protected that police service that allowed arbitration to occur here in the province of Ontario, where that does not occur in First Nation policing.
So in my riding, I'm pretty much all of my area is policed by RCMP instead of any actual First Nations policing in there. But I'm wondering if you could tell me about how the communications between them, is there cooperation amongst them when they look at trying to get funding for those between the different areas, or is it almost always one-on-one, each nation's begging us on their own?
One of the founding driving factors of the Indigenous Police Chiefs of Ontario forming in August of 2019 was simply the negotiation tactics of Public Safety Canada. They would share, or they would negotiate with one self-administered police service, and then we would be told, don't tell the others what you're getting. And we would find out in meetings in the back rooms that one service got more or less than the other. It was on the province of Ontario that the driving factor was so that the police chiefs got together, formed the association, and began sharing amongst ourselves, which cut into Canada's, or Public Safety Canada's, negotiation tactics of dividing and conquering.
Thank you. One question for Chief Montour. You mentioned about the problems with the illegal guns coming through from mostly from the U.S. I'm assuming that you say that the confiscation scheme that has come up is not going to help in dealing with any of your dealing with crimes with your guns in your area. Can you just elaborate on what plans that would help for you?
Really, we wouldn't have the time or the resources to get involved with that buyback program that's being proposed by the current government. Like I said earlier, we're busy trying to keep this community safe with the influx of guns being smuggled across the border. And like my colleagues, Chief Sky, he's a hunter, I'm a hunter. We're legal gun owners. And I see this time and time again, and I hear it from my friends who are hunters, especially in Indigenous communities. That's a way of life for us. And why is the gun owner always the one being penalized? Penalize the bad guys smuggling them. The mandatory minimums for weapons trafficking have been revoked. And I know that there's work being done now to enhance the border for fentanyl, but that can also include weapons smuggling. Because like I said earlier, with these gang members coming in from the GTA, we're getting guns coming in that are ghost guns, which are 3D printed. We're getting guns with the serial numbers scratched off. Before it was, we do a search warrant at a drug house, we'd get a sawed-off shotgun that someone used for squirrel hunting a few years prior. But now it's handguns, it's high-powered automatic guns that are smuggled. So again, like,
Thank you very much, Chief. That draws us to the end, and we're just a little over that timing. And just before we close, I'm exercising the chair's discretion to ask a question in the last spot belonging to the Liberals, and was listening to this excellent testimony and questions, and following up on a question about, and I've been to the APS badge ceremonies and award ceremonies. They're great, and I've seen Indigenous officers, and then I've seen non-Indigenous officers. You mentioned that they're being trained at the Ontario College. What kind of extra training do the non-Indigenous, if any, get there, or what do you do to augment that for your new officer hires?
We do our best, based on our funding, to provide the best training that is available based on our budget. Most of the training is held by the Ontario Police College. So we try to heavily invest as best we can, and probably, I know my service, we will send as many people as we can to the Ontario Police College just to get the qualifications to investigate major crimes, especially. So we do everything we can and focus in on our training as best we can to send them across the province, because the Ontario Police College actually has training across the province of Ontario. Because some of the hardships in my communities is getting to Elmer. So we have hosted in some of our detachments areas the training provided by the Ontario Police College. So I'm so happy that they're able to come to our communities to do that. Very grateful for that.
Good. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for that testimony today. And you had mentioned, and my last comment is that you talked about a gap in funding, if you will, human resources wise, but also facility wise that you had mentioned. If you wouldn't mind providing sort of that gap analysis to our analysts that we could take a look at as well, because I'm sure it's quite lengthy and we don't have the time to delve into it this evening. So, Chief Miigwech. And with that, that brings us to the end, and we will suspend for our next panel. And I wanted to thank everyone online as well as everyone in the room. So again, Chief Miigwech. Okay, welcome back. We've had a little bit of technical issues today on the Hill, so we were just dealing with those, and we continue to deal with those. So we will roll with things, and I appreciate the committee's understanding. The interpretation isn't working well, and we will not roll unless the interpretation online works for the interpreters here. So that's just what we're doing. It's a technical issue. But welcome back. We do have in person with us David Chartrand, President, National Government of the Red River Métis from the Manitoba Métis Federation. Welcome, Mr. Chartrand. You have 5 minutes, and then we will, Dave, and then we will we'll go to the people online. If the interpretation isn't working, unfortunately, we cannot hear that testimony, and we'll have to jig that. So,
okay, thank you very much, Terry. Let me start off again by saying good evening to all the I-9 committee, and thank you for inviting me to appear today to discuss Indigenous policing from the Red River Métis perspective. It is a privilege to speak on an issue that is so critical to the safety and sovereignty of our communities. For generations, our people have upheld our own system of governance, justice, and collective responsibility. As Louis Riel, the father of Manitoba, said, "When the Government of Canada presented itself at our doors, it found us at peace. It found that the Métis people of the Northwest could not only live without it, but that it had a government of its own, free, peaceful, well-functioning, and contributing to the work of civilization. It was a government with an organized constitution whose jurisdiction was all the more legitimate and worthy of respect because exercise of a country belonged to it." That's the quote of Louis Riel. We have long known how to protect our families through community-driven laws that govern our people and force consequences. The prairies were not the Wild West. We had our own form of policing rooted in respect and infused in our cultural values. Public safety has been at the top of our mind for over 200 years, and our efforts to be included are not new. It is a continuation of a long legacy. Despite this, we are never included in Canada's strategy to reform Indigenous policing. Yet our villages have the exact same challenges as our First Nation relatives. However, we have fewer services and resources, and often none at all in our villages. For us, this gap deeply impacts our communities. We currently lack a consistent presence that collaborates with local service providers, provides mental health and addiction support, and has the ability and means to prevent harm before it happens through de-escalation and trauma response. Instead, we have responders who only come into our community when there are emergencies and do not have a strong sense of who we are, as they are from one detachment, I'm talking RCMP, given the impossible task of serving 10 communities. This is a reactive approach, focused on responding to emergencies rather than a proactive approach that focuses on preventing emergencies and making our seniors, elders, and our other vulnerable citizens feel safe in their own community. It is not the fault of the police. This is a system that we have been forced into. These issues are further worsened by the need for bail reform and a revolving door of repeat offenders returning to our community. This is why we look forward to the passing of Bill C-14. For too long, the safety of our nation has relied on systems that were not designed for us and do not understand our realities, our histories, and our unique approach to community safety. Our people deserve policing that reflects our language, families, and values. They also deserve a strategy that will help prevent harm before it happens. One where they feel safe, their rights are upheld, and they can trust those that are serving in their communities. Through our Red River Métis Justice Strategy and the recently published Indigenous Justice Strategy process, we have emphasized the dire need for Red River Métis specific public safety in our villages. Through these strategy, though these strategies did not go far enough, they need to be used as a starting point. This is my recommendation to this committee. There must be a Red River Métis specific Indigenous policing plan. There are hundreds of villages, and there is no commitment to a Red River Métis specific plan. There is no strategy or commitment to prevent change, for permanent change, but rather the illusion of inclusion. They asked us to sit on boards and receive bulletins rather than driving real reform. This would require long-term, stable, and flexible funding, as well as commitment from all jurisdictions to collaborate and implement a new pathway for Red River Métis policing. We know that this is a complex endeavor, but it is one that we are ready for. We already have our own laws. We have the Métis laws of the harvest, and in the near future, we'll have our own child and family service laws, as well as other laws that will follow. In closing, but instead of being able to properly enforce them, we will need to rely on existing colonial entities to enforce our laws. This is not self-government in action, and this denies us from truly reaching our potential. We owe it to our ancestors to follow their lead, and we also owe it to our future generations to ensure that our families grow up in a safe community that understands them, respects them, and cares for them. In order for progressive change to reach an ultimate objective, it will take an inclusionary platform where we are not looking in through the window, but are meaningful partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Chartrand. And for the first round, William. Sorry, they're not testing.
Well, you can go with Dascody.
Yeah?
You can go with Dascody.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, but the Dascody is good to go.
Yeah. So we're still testing the folks online, and we're still waiting for them to get a green light from our interpreters.
The Dascody is good.
Who is?
Yeah, she.
Which one?
Dascody.
Oh, okay. So what we do have is we have Deborah. I got to put my glasses back on. So Deborah Doss Cody, Chief Officer from the Statli Tribal Police Service. Thank you very much for your patience, and please, your testing worked.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. Ketwat lapi and shnuk nukwa, shincha, shdidas, Cody and squachicha, Mali and uchomichwa, ashka, chachelmuch, kanst, atlimuch. Ní stafinelstas nan skachza muta debi mitchelni bob and shkikiza chachelmachti ian shlililtma. Ní spurtha bob muta shmari James ní sheep na ian kukukwa chachelmachti. Ní spitli bob muta shphilip das na ian shvizpapaza chachelmachti. Hello everyone. I am Deborah Doss Cody. I am from Fountain of Lillooet of the Statliam Territory. And I just introduced my parents and grandparents to you so that if I have any relatives that are in your community, that you will know who they are and you will know my bloodline. That is a traditional way of introduction in the Statliam Territory. And I'm coming to you today from Tifkit, Lillooet, British Columbia. And I serve with the Statliam Tribal Police Service. I have been a police officer for 36 years and a chief of police for 13 years. And so I'm here to discuss the Statliam Tribal Police Service and the complexities and the challenges in relation to funding and what is going on with the Statliam Tribal Police Service and Indigenous policing. So some of the challenges that we face, the one that you have heard about is the being deemed an essential service, which the Statliam Tribal Police Service nor any other standalone tribal police service has been deemed. This not being deemed an essential service creates doubt, and being deemed an essential service would remove that doubt for our officers and their future. It makes it very challenging when you get a funding agreement and it's 5 years, 10 years, and there is no no job security. It creates problems, it creates challenges for recruiting and retention. In 2020, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau told First Nations chiefs that the government would introduce legislation to make policing in their communities an essential service. Quote, "We will accelerate work on First Nations policing, including legislating it as an essential service, while expanding the number of communities served and supporting community safety and well-being projects." No timeline was given, and it is now November 19th, 2025, and standalone Indigenous police services are still not deemed an essential service. In March, we had the COVID pandemic, and the World Health Organization declared the pandemic, which ended on May 5th in 2023. During COVID-19, liquor stores in British Columbia were deemed essential due to their critical role in providing cannabis and alcohol to the public. And so they were recognized and deemed essential to support public, and a promise to ensure that the public would have access to these things. We are a police service who provides public safety, and, we have not yet been deemed essential, yet we can deem liquor and cannabis essential to a province when there's a pandemic. The issues that are unique to the SDPS retention, so in British Columbia, Surrey PD and Vancouver PD, they present stiff recruiting competition, including signing bonuses and moving cost reimbursements. Surrey Police Service experienced constables can receive up to $25,000 signing bonus. RCMP members who lateral to Surrey, members who lateral in to Surrey could receive up to $20,000 for a signing bonus. There's also a $10,000 signing bonus for other experienced frontline constables and $15,000 for qualified cybercrime investigators. There's more opportunity for greater variety of work experience, promotion, a better lifestyle. Example, unfettered time off. SDPS members are constantly on call and forced to work large amounts of overtime due to lack of resources. Currently, the SDPS has 14 officers, 4 of which are off due to various reasons, whether it's work safe and injury. So, and we do have an MOU with the RCMP who provides backup service. However, that MOU is still in progress, and their resources are stretched thin as well. So there's a reliance on each other for backup. And this unfettered time and the on-call leads to low morale and high stress levels because our officers are not dealing with calls for service in relation to barking dogs. We're dealing with sex assaults. We're dealing with domestic violence. So we're dealing with files that are serious in nature. And SDPS members are highly sought after and are heavily recruited, and they meet the same policing standards as any other municipal police officer in the province of British Columbia because they receive their training at the Justice Institute of British Columbia, same as any other municipal officer. We currently have a long-term 10-year funding agreement, but this does not permit for flexible adjustments despite our quick changing environment.
Thank you very much, Sandra. What we're going to do is we're going to, you'll be able to speak some more through the questioning, but we're at the 5-minute mark. We just wanted to try Sandra, just test Sandra to see if we can get, we're going to go from you, Deborah, to Sandra and have Sandra's mic tested.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sandra, if you wanted to say a few words for interpretation, please.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm hoping this is okay for interpretation.
Keep talking.
Do you just want me to start my presentation?
Sure, say a few words, please, and I'll...
Okay. So, Honorable Chairperson and committee members, I'm grateful for the opportunity to meet with you today. The name Giganawe Mananig means we all take care of them. We are
I'm sorry, Sandra. The interpreters are giving me the thumbs down. They can't hear you, so Apologize, so we'll deal with you, get a brief from you, or make an arrangement at another time, Sandra. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to go to questions with, all right, William, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'll start with Ms. Dascodia. I don't think I need to hear a whole lot more from you, because you were very good on what you were determining that we need to change so that you're deemed to be essential services. I know during the pandemic, I found it rather interesting that as an accountant doing taxes, that was deemed essential services, mostly probably because they wanted to collect the taxes, but it did not always make sense as to what is deemed essential services, but in my opinion, you definitely should be. So that is something I think we definitely need to take forward for a recommendation. But if I can go to Mr. Chartrand, in our previous panel, we made I mentioned a comment that this committee actually is a lot of rural, and we probably have half a dozen of the largest rural ridings in the country. Can you expand on something along the lines where you were talking about how the funding is not necessarily the same in the rural, and how it's affecting the rural areas because they're not on the same par that you've got. I guess I could have gone to Ms. Dascodia as well with that, but if you want to start, Mr. Chartrand. You're good.
I'm good? Okay, thank you very much. Well, firstly, let's, as I said in my reference in my report, is that when you look at I'll use my community I come from, it's called Duck Bay, Duck Bay, Manitoba. It's northern Manitoba towards more central in the north. But we live beside Pine Creek Reserve, which is like 2 miles away, 3 miles away. They have community policing. They have programs and services. We have nothing. And Camperville is also another Métis village, and the reserves between us. There's 2 big Métis villages. However, we have no services. The police we have that protect or attempt to deal with some peace in the community comes about 45, 50 miles away, and that's where they're positioned in Winnipegosis. So,
the part where how the funding is affecting
that's what we're trying to lead to. In order for you to understand it, I got to lead you to there. So when you look at the process, you got, and I said, Winnipeg Police covers about 10 villages, 10 communities, reserves and Métis communities. So they're full spread out. They're only there to pick up people and when action happens in the community. So there's no funding balance between us and next door to the reserve. We don't have no policing. We pay taxes like you and everybody else, but we don't have the services there to align or work with us to make sure it's dealt in the community or affected and quickly reacted in the community. So we're starting to see a greater approach of gangs, drug dealers coming in the villages and communities. We know who they are. We talk to the RCMP, and I even personally phone them at times and say, look, this house is the one that's selling drugs there. We said, we can't do nothing unless you can prove to us they're selling drugs. So they want us to go and prove and catch them on picture or camera or something selling us drugs. So that puts some people in harm's way, by the way. So, but again, we're trying to figure out how do we find that balance. But if there's no approach to investing in our communities, to have policing or community police forces, we used to have constables at one time, I'm talking 30 years ago. They disappeared. We used to have them in town, and they made a big difference because they're right in the village and they know everybody. They can go to your house if there's something happening and people are having a problem. Say there's a party going on. That constable can go to that house and calm everybody down because they know him and he knows the people. But we don't have that. So you get more crime, more reaction, and then you get more harm. And so it really costs us overall as taxpayers a lot more money because now you got to pick them up, take them to jail. And by that time, harm has started in that village, in that community, and it lingers on to family clans now.
Thank you. Can I just ask you to, you're talking about the limited resources that you have, and can you elaborate on what you would think the buyback scheme happens, how that's going to affect your communities and in your areas with regards to the illegal guns issue?
Well, guns, first, it will protect the issue of our rifles to hunt and harvest and our shotguns. But we support that. We don't believe in you needed this the weapons used in wars and so forth, those type of military guns or handguns of any nature. We don't support that either. But we will protect our rifles and our shotguns. That we need that to continue existing in the way we do. But our families have seen that there's an higher rate of gangs using more guns. It's getting more dangerous for police also. And so, because we have Métis police officers that are part of the RCMP or part of the municipal policing programs. But clearly, at the end of the day, guns do play a more dangerous situation. There was just one, for example, in Manitoba, in Saugeen Reserve, just shot by an RCMP. He had a knife, so he just got killed. So by the time they took him in, it was too late. So when you look overall, guns are something we're very cautious of. We watch very carefully. But we also will protect our rights to our rifles and our shotguns to keep feeding our families through our cultural ways of harvesting.
I don't know if I get
Thank you very much, and that brings us to the 6 minutes. And Jeanette now for 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Just turn myself off. President Chartrand, thank you so much for being here. Long time no see. So, yes, thank you so much for your testimony. It's good to have you here on the committee. Can you maybe share with us what the MMS current collaboration is with municipal and provincial policing services to help address community safety?
Right, we do have a dialogue with the RCMP. Actually, I get an update on my phone personally from any incident that happens in my communities, but it's after the fact. So they'll, you know, so-and-so was arrested and so forth, was injured, etc. That helps in some ways because I could deal with the family before it storms out into some issue. But it's only that. We used to have a liaison officer that was located in our building from the RCMP. That's now gone because they say they're short HR in their own department. So that leads us with the vacancy there of having a more connectivity with the RCMP. But we do have a good relationship directly with the chief of police on whether it's municipal and at the same time with the RCMP. But it's good for having an ability to talk to each other, but there's no plan. There is no plan. And that's what I think this committee should be asking itself, the question. Even if you were to give advice or direction, and you look at the institutions that we have today, 5% is the population of Indigenous people in this country, and we make up over 30% in the federal institutions. Women make up over 50% in the women jails in this country. But there's no data. You're not collecting data of the Red River Métis anywhere. So how do you know who you're dealing with? In your own picture, when I come walking in this room, you got as a committee, INAN committee, you got the Inuit configuration, you got the Métis Infinity, and you got the totem pole for the First Nation. You describe 3 different Indigenous people, but you do not deal with 3 different Indigenous people. You use the word Indigenous, and there's a difference between all 3 of us. There's a completely difference in service providers and reaction of how we govern, how we operate, and how we have relationships with the policing. So it's important, I think, the question you need to ask yourselves, how do you collect data to give us or give anybody the proper recommendations on how to address this issue? It is a serious issue. It's costing everybody a lot of money, and it's causing a lot of harm. So we need to figure out how do we compile it. And I can't just be sitting at a meeting with the chief of police talking about matters but seeing nothing change. And nothing is changing. So we need to make change if we're going to make a difference. And just for the committee members, in most of our village off reserve, and he asked the question, he's left now, in rural Manitoba, there is no sports by schools anymore. So the community, the baseball diamonds are empty. All of the basketball you have a odd kid playing once in a while. There is nothing happening in the communities. So where's the proactiveness of the youth and the opportunity to keep them busy so they don't get into crime? So gangs are taking advantage of this. And so we got to figure out how do we stop that. But you can't make a decision if you don't know who you're dealing with. You do not keep data on us, nor you just use the word Indigenous. And if you start keeping data, then you could at least recommend to any government, whether it's your government or a sitting government that's going to be in play, how to spend money taxpayers' money on how to make change. And you could evaluate how that change would measure itself because you know what you're spending it on and how. But if you just blanket out to Indigenous people, you can never properly measure it and see, well, is the taxpayer money being spent wisely? Is there a good return? Is it making change? But that's something that really bothers us a lot because nobody seems to collect this data to tell us how we work on it.
So maybe expanding on that a little bit further, because it speaks to, I mean, the collection of data helps inform to develop strategies and those kinds of things. Do you have experience with, or have you got ideas on models of cooperation or co-development that could exist or that do exist and that you would want to bring in order to ensure that, you know, working with the Métis government and the federal government, this could be co-developed?
Well, clearly, there's programs Canada was running. UPIP is an acronym for it. Urban Indigenous Population for Sports and Recreation Investments of Proactiveness. And that program's been cut now, and we're wondering to see where it's at. We're pushing Canada to see where it's at. We understand it'll be expanded for 1 year. We don't know what's after that. But that program makes change. That's a particular program where you have collaboration of where the federal government, who has jurisdiction with Indigenous people, is actually investing in something proactive in the villages and communities, because that's the only thing they have. They have nothing else. And I know you can't tell provincial schools what to do because they run the schools, the provinces. But if you don't have nothing proactive in a school that'll have kids busy and involved in something proactive where they can gain pride and self-esteem and have a better outlook to the future, you're not going to make that change. So from our perspective, we believe that sitting down with the police, with the ministers, coming with a collaboration, but it's got to be distinct base. You cannot be Indigenous. That's the only way you're going to measure whether I'm a failure as a leader, I'm not doing justice with the resources I'm managing, or the investment we're doing is not working, we need to change it, stop it, and go in a different direction. There's no way you're going to make change unless you go distinct based.
Thank you very much. I think I'm kind of wrapping up the time.
Thank you very much. And Sébastien, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. And President Chartrand, I'm very happy to see you here, especially in this context where we're celebrating this week the 140th anniversary of the death of Louis Riel by hanging. So it's special that we're meeting in that particular context, because when we talk about Indigenous police services and the application of laws that are different and how the colonial system imposed, especially to the Métis, its own laws, its own regime that had a huge impact on your community, your development, and of your nation. Do the federal programs reflect the acknowledgement of the distinct quality of the Métis, or are they treated as a secondary model in funding models that are conceived primarily for First Nations and Inuit? So the program of police services of First Nations and Inuit don't have the word Métis included.
How it's treated, because Canada continues to avoid that the Métis, Reverend Métis, are Section 35 rights, or rights holders in this country and have rights. Canada still tries to avoid its responsibility, so it treats us differently. It does not want to have a direct collaboration of recognition of responsibility. So we're then pushed back to the province, and the provinces push us back to Canada. Both of them take our taxes, but they still push us back and forth who's supposed to be working with us. So when you start looking, I think, in the overall context, of just my personal experience, I used to work for the Department of Justice for 10 years. I was a probation officer for 4 years, and I was a director of the courts for 6 years. And when we looked at the opportunity of change, and I'm talking now 28 years I've been the president, I left the Department of Justice in 1996. And so when I look at even then, change was being talked about, change of the future, and distinctively on the Métis, Inuit, and First Nation. And at that time, I developed a court model along with some other judges. We wrote a court model that would make it more community-based, where decisions would be made in the community. Because that's how our laws worked. That's how we maintained peace in our communities. And it was because our families were in control. The oldest is always the boss in our Métis culture. The grandparents are the boss, and when they pass on, the parents are the boss, and they pass on, the oldest is the boss, and that keeps the family responsibility intact. And so when you affect another family, the two of the family heads would talk to trying to find peace. Because what happens in the colonial system is the Crown becomes the victim, acts on behalf of the victim. So the victim is never there. So the Crown then represents the victim. But what the Crown and the colonial system forget is that person and those two people that interacted in the justice system, they're going to go back to the same village. So those two family clans are going to still scrap when they get back home to get their own justice. So now you didn't solve nothing. You just maybe gave somebody probation or gave somebody some offense of punishment in some form, but you didn't solve the problem. So from our perspective, our laws and our way of how we manage our affairs works so well. I told my elder one time, years ago, I had a justice conference, and I said to him, how did you have so much peace? We never locked up anything. Our bikes were outside, or we leave stuff outside overnight, and never had to lock up nothing. Now, today, you got to lock up everything. You can't even go to the store unless you lock your house. In our villages, that was never the way. So this exterior of policies and driven processes that are coming to our community, how we run ourselves, is really broken our system. We got to figure out how do we bring it back to our ways. And right now we have no methodology of any distinct base approach by the provincial governments, by the RCMP, the municipal policing, nor do we have anything from Canada. There is no distinct based approach of how we're going to tackle this issue together.
J'ai failli vous demander, en toute amitié, de nous...
So I wanted to ask you to give short answers because I have a lot of questions for you, but thank you for this answer. I understand that they depend on the RCMP, and so it prevents the MMF of putting into effect your proper model of policing founded on your culture. But you signed agreements with the RCMP, and you've created positions of liaison. Have these positions created real changes, or are they limited by constraints either legal or financial?
The changes are so small. They do occur. All it does is give us a direct collaboration of how we can maybe speak of an issue that may have occurred in the community. But the liaison position that's appointed in our offices is gone now. When it was there, we had no say or dialogue with that person because he has to report directly to the head of his department in the RCMP. So yes, they were rented offices from us or state. We give them free offices, by the way, because they had no money. But there was no real collaboration. So it didn't make change. But it was good for our image. Good, we enjoy it, we respected it, but it didn't make no change.
Les programmes de justice et de prévention reçoivent un financement.
So, do these police services receive very short-term and undependable? What kind of funding do you need to guarantee the autonomy of the Métis and have, by respecting the kind of justice that's adapted to Métis culture?
Translation came late. There was nothing there. But again, I do apologize. I don't speak French. I speak Soro, my second language. But clearly the answer is that if there was a direct investment, and I think that's why it's so vital, if there's a direct investment, it could be measured. Is it working, not working? But if you do pan-Aboriginal kind of approaches, it'll never be able to measure whether it's success or not. But there is no program, there's no design by Canada or the provinces to deal with Métis villages. None.
Thank you.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to go to Chief Dos Cody. And Chief, I think you said you have 36 years of service. Is that correct?
That's correct.
As Chief of Police and in all your years of service for you and your staff and the people that you serve, is it fair to say that the expectation as a police officer and a protector of the community is that you, in any tough situation to protect people, are expected to give your life in your service?
Yes. Yeah. We're here to serve and protect like any other municipal or the RCMP Federal Police Service. We have the same training, and if anything happens, then we're the ones that attend any calls that come in, regardless of what they are. So our officers are investigating anything from assist general public to firearms complaints to sex assaults, domestic calls, things of that nature. And we investigate them from start to finish. The only thing that we do not do is if there is, say, a homicide or something that requires specialized services, then we then call out to the RCMP to come in and assist for those specialized services. We assist them by conducting, obtaining statements and assisting with the investigation, but we do not hold that investigative file.
Thank you for that answer, Chief. The RCMP is an essential service, and essentially they do not have to wait for funding and things of that nature, the stresses and the other police forces that that were talked about in terms of sustainability and everything. They're also expected to put their lives on the line for the services that they do. But what does it say about the value of your life and your officer's life when you do not get the same funding and supports as other police forces?
To us, it indicates that we are less than, we are not as important, and it doesn't even make sense. It doesn't make sense. I cannot make sense of that at all, in 2025.
It's tough to hear, Chief, and I hate to disappoint you even further. We had the public safety minister here, who's also the CERNAC minister, and he gave no commitment to make the service essential going forward. But rest assured, I still hope through all the testimony and your testimony today that this can be changed even in the years to come and to not stop fighting the good fight. Thank you for your testimony today. I want to go to
Thank you.
President Sartran. President Sartran, I want to acknowledge Louis Day a few short days ago and welcome you to Ottawa. And hopefully it's been a great week of celebrations for that, for you and your community. Indigenous nations, as some of my colleagues mentioned, include Métis, obviously. And in Manitoba, there's been some high-profile aspects and disappointments and tragedies when it comes to Indigenous women, missing and murdered women, and of course that would include Métis women as well. Can you discuss some of the successes over the last couple of years, but also some of the areas for improvement when it comes to protecting Indigenous women and girls in Manitoba from the police services, from the governments, and Métis women, of course, too, as well?
Okay, thank you for that. Firstly, just for your question earlier to the Chief of Police there, there used to be a program, and I encourage you to look it up. It was called Constable B program, and that was the position where they used Indigenous officers, but they did pay them less and treated them less. They're called Constable Bs. They were on reserve in some Métis villages. That was a whole program many, many years ago. Too bad they killed it. However, going to the question you asked, there's clearly a lot more that has to be done when it comes to missing and murdered Indigenous women and LGBT+2 community, because even ourselves in our own government, we put up $1 million ourselves, our own money, not Canada's money, not the provincial money, our own hard-earned money. We put $1 million up to assist on all Indigenous women who are First Nation, Inuit, Métis. If they're missing, that will put a reward of $10,000 to help find that. It's not that simple, too. It sounds easy because you've got to have a collaboration with the police, because when we put up the reward, then they get a ton of calls, and they have to have somebody manning those phones. So the police you got to give them credit in some ways. They've done a lot in achieving finding results, and I know in Winnipeg, in Manitoba, the RCMP and Winnipeg Police have found a lot of the end results of achieving closing files. So you got to give the police credit on that. But there was also, I think, a lot of times where the racism is kicked in there, because the person's poor or seen maybe working in the streets, they're not given the same kind of respect because they're missing. And that's where you see the serial killers and others that are taking advantage of that. So, but again, from our perspective, I know they can state long and hard that they're short officers, but at the end of the day, we know we have to do our own part. That's why I said we put up our own $1 million. And so far, we've had First Nation and Métis women that are missing, still missing, that rewards have been put up. And we'll keep on doing the program ourselves.
Thank you very much.
I wasn't going to wait for the government.
Thank you very much for that. Very appreciate that. Next is Brendan for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much to both of you for being here. Chief Officer Das Coady, I'll also start with you. You had, and I don't think you really had a chance to finish what you were going to say, including recommendations. You did refer to, the previous promise of Prime Minister Trudeau previously to introduce Indigenous policing as essential service. I presume you were going to come back to that. So feel free if you have a finishing recommendation that you want to leave us with. I also, though, wanted just a quick picture of what in the St'át'imc Nation and other nations in your region, what does community safety look like, and how, whether it's through your policing service or through collaborative services, how you're addressing community safety, whether there are gaps, whether you're seeing challenges there.
Thank you. Yes, there are definitely challenges. Like, we currently expanded our agreement to 10 years. However, due to the funding and the way it is, one of the things in relation to the funding agreements is it's not a negotiation. It is this is what we allot, and there's never any real. It's not based on population. It's not based on stats. Like, what is it? There's never any real methodology or system that we're told is how that's going to roll out. So that's one of the things that needs to be clarified in relation to these funding agreements is what is it? Is it based on population? Is it based on crime stats? Because if you look at Indigenous policing in our communities, oftentimes the statistics, the crime stats in British Columbia, we were the second highest criminal code stats in the province. And we cover 22,000 square kilometers territory, 10 communities, and we have 10 officers, And so what we're doing is we do have a good working relationship with the RCMP. So we are currently working on an MOU that needs to be updated. And we did implement a municipal pension plan, which I understand that a lot of other police services across the country do not have. And so, it was definitely a challenge for us, but we did implement that. It is, has it helped us with recruiting and retention? I'd say 50-50. So the funding model, again, that's one of the things that I would like to state is whether it's based on the crime severity index, whether it's based on Indigenous populations, or, the stats, the size of the territory, or the files that come in.
Right. And I'm going to leave it there, so I have a couple of minutes only left. But feel free to send anything in written, including, of course, your notes, if there's anything else that you'd like the committee to take away and inform our recommendations. President Chartrand, just
Thank you.
Wanted to. I was interested in that in your opening remarks. You specifically mentioned Bill C-14, which of course is currently being debated in the House, and recognizing not just your role as president, but also your background in justice. We were having a conversation before the meeting started. What are you seeing that this is going to be important in addressing some of at federal level, some of the gaps in bail reform and other measures? To address repeat offenses in particular?
For sure. I think for safety purposes, because we've seen the change of the drugs that are in our communities. Not only is drugs like crack and cocaine and cannabis and rest moving into the communities, which are then used by people, they're gone now to prescription drugs. Tylenol trees and so forth. So they're taking from our elders. They're going to our elders' homes, breaking in their elders' homes and taking those pills. They used to hear stories of people having parties. Everybody comes in with 12 of beer, a 24 beer. Today they come in with bags of pills and throw them into a bowl, and they all just grab from there. And those are prescription pills. Those are not drugs of some sort being made. So those are causing great harm, and those same people that are breaking in are going into the jail. They're picked up later. They find out who it is, but they're out the next day, and then they're threatening the elder now, and the elder is scared to become a witness, scared to tell on them, and it's causing us harm because. Justice, maybe a long time ago, went and visit that young person's house and tell him, you better not go to the elder's house again or else we'll take care of you. But those days are gone. We can't do our own policing ourselves with our own hard lines. But clearly today, the revolving door is causing issues. Unfortunately, but the sad part, there's a reverse position you got to be scared of. Because if you look at who's in the jails, and it shows you Indigenous people make up the highest numbers in this country. So they're the ones that are going to be more interactive with the bail reform necessities. And any studies have shown you non-Indigenous people were able to get bail faster because they had parents that are working, parents that had resources, and parents can buy good lawyers. So when you start looking at all of that data and information, but there's still got to be a process where people can't just walk in and walk out. That's why when I wrote that court model years ago, along with judges, it was actually where we would have the community control and adjudicate the matter in their village. So you would know if Tommy was the one acting up. What does a defense lawyer goes into the courtroom and he says, oh, Tommy's looking for work every day, he's doing this. We know Tommy's at home sleeping and he's drunk in the weekends. Don't come to a court and lie to us. The judge doesn't see that. But if you're doing it in the community sees it. They'll say, don't lie to us. Tommy was drunk the other day. We seen him. You're not giving us no excuse here. So those systems were truly remarkable and made a big difference. But that's gone now, and we need to figure out how we take it back.
Thank you very much, President Chartrand. It's very dry in here. And now
in front of you.
That brings us.
Thank you for that.
That brings us to our last questioner, Sebastian, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Président
Thank you, President Chartrand. I think that there's unanimous consent among the witnesses we had that there should be a act to recognize police services as essential. Do you think the Métis should be presented as a distinct group for that, and the budget of 2025 has no funding for police services for First Nations? And you signed an agreement recently for a modern treaty, a treaty that we're awaiting impatiently that it be tabled at the House of Commons so we could deal with it here at the committee. Are there components that will acknowledge provision of police services adapted to culture, Métis culture, that are directed by Métis people?
I agree with you 100%. I hope the federal government will look at ensuring now that in order for the Métis, Red River Métis to have justice, we too need supports. We need policing. We need we'll fight the fight of equal salaries later. But as long as we have some safety and protection in our communities is a necessity. Our treaty is coming before. It should be in Parliament in a couple of weeks, and then hit this committee, and I can look forward to that. And that's 155 years in the making. So we've been waiting 155 years. We're very patient people. But let me say this. I thank the committee for what you're doing, but clearly at the end of the day, we got to take this thing seriously because there's more gangs, more people in trouble, more people hurting, and we need to find ways to protect them. And right now, the system is just overcome with too much. And we got to find a way. How do we balance this? We cannot continue. The police can't do nothing. Police are only reacting. That's all they're doing is just reacting. There's no more plans of how do we find a relationship. That's why the constable that's speaking there, I guarantee that constable and the rest of her force have a relationship with their community, their members, their families. They know each other, and they will be able to react. Us, we have outsiders that come and adjudicate our matters, and they're only coming on emergency calls. That's the only time they're coming into our towns, and only to pick up people or charge people. That's it. So they're not seen as friends. They're not seen as a relationship. They're seen as somebody they do not trust, somebody they do not have a relationship. I still trying to promote the policing to our community, that we have to trust them. We got to work with them. They're there to protect our safety. However, on the other hand, our people have a lot of mistrust because there's a lot of bad stories out there. So there's things that occurred to us and have done to us that are not well established. So again, 100% agree with you, Sebastian. I wish the message you're giving this committee would give Canada is that there's got to be a Métis-specific Red River policing program in this country.
Mais je comprends qu'à court et à moyen terme.
But I understand that on the short and midterm, you have no expectations of the federal government in order to have independent services. But I see my time has passed, so thank you. And so thank you very much for having come, Mr. Chartrand. Thank you very much.
Chief Dos Cody, President Chartrand, for your testimony today. And with the consent of committee, I would propose an adjournment. Got a nodding heads. Adjourned.